It's 1992. A small town in Wales called Merthyr Tydfil. A group of male volunteers have just finished a clinical trial for a new heart medication. The trial is over. The drug didn't work particularly well for the heart condition it was designed to treat. The researchers from Pfizer show up to collect the unused pills back. And the men refuse to give them back. Not some of them. Most of them. The researchers are confused. The drug barely worked for the heart. Why would anyone want to keep it? Now, if you're already guessing the answer, congratulations. You're faster than the entire Pfizer research team. And then, slowly, the truth comes out. Something else was happening. Something nobody had planned for. Something that would go on to become one of the most famous drugs ever made, generating over $2 billion in its very first year on the market. Welcome to Stories of Drug Discovery, where every week we bring you the remarkable, surprising, and deeply human stories behind the medicines that changed the world. Perfect for whenever you have a few minutes and a curious mind. Whether you are driving, walking, cooking, or just sitting with a cup of coffee. Today, Viagra, the accidental discovery that nobody saw coming. Except, apparently, the volunteers in Wales. Let's get into it. To understand how Viagra came to exist, you have to go back to the late 1980s. Pfizer had a molecule that looked genuinely promising. It was called Sildenafil. On paper, it looked like a breakthrough treatment for angina, the chest pain that happens when the heart isn't getting enough blood. The mechanism made sense. Sildenafil relaxed the smooth muscle in blood vessel walls, allowing blood to flow more freely. Less resistance, better circulation, potentially less chest pain. Pfizer invested years of research and millions of dollars in developing it. Suits were pressed, presentations were made, executives were excited, and then the clinical trials came back. Sildenafil was fine, not great, not even close to the breakthrough they had hoped for. It reduced chest pain a little, but not enough to compete with medications already on the market. Somewhere in Pfizer headquarters, someone had a very uncomfortable Monday morning meeting. By most measures, the drug had failed. Years of work, millions of dollars, and a molecule that worked, just not for the right thing. They were preparing to wind the whole program down. And then the nurses started talking to the patients. During clinical trials, researchers routinely ask patients about side effects, headaches, nausea, dizziness, the usual list. But the male volunteers kept mentioning something else, something they brought up quietly, almost embarrassed. They were getting unexpected erections, frequent ones, strong ones, at thoroughly inconvenient times. Now at this point, picture the nurse with her clipboard, pen hovering, trying to maintain complete professionalism. Most pharmaceutical companies would have noted this in the side effect column, filed it away, and never spoken of it again. An unexpected erection is not exactly what you're looking for when developing a heart medication. Unless, of course, it is. But a Pfizer scientist named Peter Dunn and his colleague Albert Wood looked at this data and had a completely different reaction. They thought, wait a moment, is this actually a problem? Or is this the drug? Because erectile dysfunction affected hundreds of millions of men worldwide. And in 1992, there was essentially no good treatment for it. The options available were invasive, uncomfortable, and deeply unpopular. We are talking about treatments that made men look at the alternatives and think, you know what, I'm fine actually. If sildenafil could reliably and safely produce erections, that wasn't a side effect. That was a billion-dollar drug hiding inside a failed heart medication. The most profitable accident in pharmaceutical history was sitting right there in the data. So why was sildenafil doing this? Here is the simple version. Think of blood flow like water running through a garden hose. In a healthy system, when the moment is right, the hose opens up, water flows freely, and everything works as it should. In men with erectile dysfunction, something is crimping that hose. The flow is restricted. The system doesn't work properly. Now, there is a chemical in the body called nitric oxide that acts like the hand that opens the hose. It triggers a cascade that relaxes the blood vessels, right? Increases blood flow and produces an erection. But there is also an enzyme called PDE5, whose entire job is to act as a brake on this process. Think of PDE5 as that one colleague who slows everything down right when things are getting good. Sildenafil blocks PDE5. No brake. Hose opens. Blood flows. The system works. Elegant, simple, and remarkably effective. Pfizer ran new clinical trials specifically for erectile dysfunction, and the results were extraordinary. Sildenafil worked consistently, safely, effectively. The FDA approved it in March 1998. Pfizer named it Viagra, and the world was apparently very ready for it. In its first week on the market, doctors wrote 40,000 prescriptions. 40,000 in 1 week. Pharmacists across America had never seen anything like it. In its first year, Viagra generated over $1 billion in sales, making it the fastest-selling drug in pharmaceutical history at the time. The failed heart drug had become the world's most talked-about pill. Dinner table conversations would never be quite the same again. But beyond the commercial success, Viagra did something equally important. It opened up a conversation that millions of men had been too embarrassed to have with their doctors. Erectile dysfunction was common, deeply connected to quality of life and relationships, and almost entirely treatable. But stigma meant most men suffered in silence. Viagra gave them and their doctors a way to finally talk about it. Sometimes it takes a little blue pill to start a very big conversation. Here is the part most people don't know. Remember that mechanism? Blocking PDE5, relaxing the blood vessels, improving blood flow? Turns out the body has PDE5 in more places than one. Fast forward to 2005, and the FDA approved sildenafil under a completely different name, Revatio, for pulmonary arterial hypertension, a serious and potentially fatal condition where blood pressure in the lung arteries becomes dangerously high. Think of it like a traffic jam, but in the blood vessels of your lungs. Everything is backed up. The heart is working overtime just to push blood through. Sildenafil clears the jam. The same molecule, the same mechanism. A completely different disease. The failed heart drug that accidentally became Viagra accidentally became a treatment for a life-threatening lung condition. 3 lives in 1 molecule. At this point, sildenafil deserves its own biography. And researchers are still studying it today for potential applications in heart failure, altitude sickness, and even certain types of cancer. The volunteers in Wales who refused to give their pills back had absolutely no idea what they had stumbled onto, which honestly is the best kind of scientific discovery there is, the accidental kind. Viagra became a punchline, a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of pharmaceutical ambition. It inspired jokes on every late-night show, became shorthand for an entire era, and somehow ended up in the name of a racehorse. Yes, that actually happened. A racehorse named Viagra. Science truly gives us everything. But underneath all of that, it's a story about paying attention. The data was there. Most people would have logged it as an inconvenient side effect and moved on. Peter Dunn and Albert Wood looked at that same data and asked, what if this isn't the problem? What if this is the answer? That shift in perspective from side effect to opportunity is one of the most valuable things a scientist can do. Sometimes the drug you were looking for was hiding inside the drug that failed. And sometimes it takes a group of men in Wales refusing to hand back their pills to change the world. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe so you never miss a new one. And if you know someone who loves a good story, whether they are a researcher, a scientist, a doctor, a nurse, a student, or simply someone with a curious mind, share this with them. The best stories are always better when shared. Every week, a new story. Next week, we go back to 1921. Toronto, Canada. A 14-year-old boy weighing less than 30 kilograms is lying in a hospital bed, his body consuming itself. His parents sitting beside him, knowing exactly what is coming. Because in 1921, a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was not a manageable condition. It was a death sentence. And in a laboratory across town, a broke, unqualified surgeon with no research experience whatsoever was about to change everything. The story of insulin is one of the most dramatic, heartbreaking, and ultimately triumphant stories in the entire history of medicine. You will not want to miss it. See you next week.